Hey everybody, Drew here, and today I want to talk to you guys about Prius Morning Death Rattle. This is a second gen Prius, 2004 through 2009. It's quite a bit different than my video about the 2010 through 2015 third generation. Covers the same thing. If the car sits overnight or for a long period of time, you start it up and you hear like a rat-tat-tat-tat-tat, like crazy shaking and banging sound for a couple seconds to maybe half a minute or so. This video is for you. So this is what it sounds like in real life when you start it. If your car's doing that, I'm going to talk to you today about all the possible reasons that it could be, which again are going to be quite a bit different than my other videos, so make sure to watch the entire thing. So first I want you guys to understand exactly what you're hearing. Now, a rod knock in an engine, this goes way back to when engines first were in cars 130 years ago or more. You know, 1883 was the first car, right? So engines have a crankshaft and there's a bearing in there, and the connecting rod, if that bearing wears out, it'll go like it'll move a little bit and you get like a knock, 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 knock when it's running, right? Or a piston slap, when the piston starts to get sideways a little bit from a worn bore, you hear like a tat, 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 tat. Or it could be the wrist pin, which is kind of the same sound. That's the pin, if you will, that holds that connecting rod up inside the piston. This isn't that. This is a just for like a couple seconds when you start the car. What you're actually hearing isn't the engine at all. There's a plate, there's a flywheel, and then on it there's a plate instead of a clutch like in a manual, but it's completely different. There's a plate that has some spring loadedness that allows for some actuation between the power split device, which is what a Prius has instead of a transmission. It is not a CVT in any way, shape, and form. I'm aware that websites all over the world, including our own, that list these cars for sale, call a Prius's transmission CVT. It's not even close. It's a power split device. It's a planetary gear system. There's no belt. There's two electric motors, and the one that's closest to the engine turns it on and off. Right? It can put power to the through that plate and into the flywheel and into the motor to start it up. What you're hearing is a misfire. So this engine, like any Prius, has 4 cylinders. Doesn't matter if it has 2, 4, 12, whatever. When one of those cylinders or more isn't firing like it should be, you get rapid, completely erratic rotation in the engine, and what you're hearing is that spring-loaded plate knocking against itself kind of thing. So that begs the question, what's causing the misfire? So there's a lot of things that could, and I'm going to go from worst to easiest. So it could unfortunately be just a worn out engine. Probably not the case if you're watching this and you got like 150,000 miles. These are very, very good cars. Definitely the best Prius ever made. And if you disagree, I'd like to hear why in the comments. 2004 to 2009 has proven itself to be the most reliable one. I'm in love with the 2016 and newer, but they haven't been around long enough to prove themselves. Anyways, if it's a worn out engine, the piston rings that create pressure between the piston itself and the wall that it's inside of, if those are worn out, there's going to be a loss of compression past them. Valves, which come down from the top and seal, again, to make that compression for gasoline to blow up and do its thing. If those are worn out, that'll be a symptom as well. You get a misfire, and when everything's cold, it's going to be worse. So that is possible. That's an internal engine issue. But again, that's not what would be making the noise. It's the flex plate or the spring-loaded plate over here that's actually making the sound, the craziness. It could be the head gasket. If your head gasket is blown and it's leaking a little bit of coolant into the cylinder or multiple cylinders at night while the car sits, you start it up. Obviously, that cylinder is not going to fire properly. You're going to get that misfire. It's going to make that sound. Much, much, much less serious than that could be the ignition system. Could be old worn out spark plugs, or it could be the coil packs on top of them not creating the spark. So an engine runs when it has compression, fuel, and spark, and of course air, obviously, but that's kind of a given. So if everything else is right, the compression's good, the gasoline is good, but it's not firing, that could be your issue. The other one is gasoline. So you have a fuel pump that pumps gas at a decently high pressure, probably like 40 psi, to the fuel rail, which is here. Not sure if you can see that. My finger's on it. Through the fuel line, and there's a filter in the middle. So a bad pump, a clogged filter, or a clogged fuel injector could be the issue. Now, I just had this happen to one of my Prius in my lot, and I went through it, and I'm going to tell you guys exactly everything I did, and I'm really hoping that you could kind of pick apart the steps I went through and apply it to your own. First and foremost, it sounded like this when I started it. So I immediately started by pulling out, I just take off this guy here. There's a 10 millimeter here, there's a 10 millimeter here, and then there's brackets which are, I call them obnoxious brackets. You got to get in there with a pick on both sides of it to get them out. You don't even have to get those fully out. It's nice too, but you can pull this and just bend the wire and keep it over here. And then you've got 10 millimeters that hold in your ignition coils. The last one's kind of tricky. You got to unplug it before you lift it up at all, and then rotate it as soon as you do lift it up to clear it. But there's just those 10 millimeter bolts there. I got those out. I pulled out my spark plugs. I got original spark plugs, had them in hand, NGK, which is the original equipment, had those ready to go, and I looked inside my cylinders with a borescope, which is a camera. You could get it on Amazon. They're cheap. They're like 40, 50 bucks. You look inside the cylinder. They should have carbon on them. They should look kind of dirty and old and cruddy. If they're steam cleaned and look perfect and nice and shiny like that, that's a good indication of a head gasket failure, because it's steam cleaning from the coolant, which is essentially water, right? Burning off. It's been steam cleaned. So that's what you don't want to see. You want your cylinders to look like this, your pistons to look like this. Now, while I was in there, I was fortunate. All my cylinders looked the same, and they had carbon on them like they should. So I put in new spark plugs, again, which is kind of a given, and then I gave the car a day to sit. Came back the next morning. I was hopeful, but I've been down this road before, so not too hopeful. I started it up, and right? So my next suspect is coil packs. I'm lucky because I have like several of these at all times. I had one that ran perfect, so I took all 4 coil packs, I threw them in there, and I waited till the next day. Started the car again, so now I know it's not my coil packs, because the spark plugs are new. The coil packs came from a car that has never made that sound, and yet this car is still doing it. So I dug a little bit further, and this part might be tricky for you guys. You might not have coil packs from another Prius. They are pretty cheap. Just make sure you get Denso, because it's the original equipment. You get them on Rock Auto. Maybe just buy all 4. You know, you're going to do a tune-up to the motor anyways by doing this, which is good. If it ends up being a bad engine, you could take out those new parts and put them on the replacement engine that you put in. But I was able to use a relatively simple scan tool to look at the misfire counter. Now, if your engine light's on, P0300, which is multiple random misfire, or P0301, 2, 3, or 4 at the end, that's cylinder 1, 2, 3, 4, and it obviously goes up to like 16 or however many maximum cylinders there are in cars these days. Bugattis still have 16 cylinders. Cadillac made one from 1930 to 1940, but they didn't have a OBD2 port. Anyways, if you have a check engine light for a misfire, then it's a given. But this car didn't, and I was able to use the misfire counter, which will pick up small misfires before the engine light even thinks of coming on, and it came back as cylinder 1. So now I had something to work with a little bit. But I knew that my coils were good. I knew that my spark plugs were good. I was 99.9% convinced that the head gasket was good, and it is not a common issue for head gaskets to fail on a 2nd generation, while sadly it is on a 3rd generation. So my next suspect was fuel. I did not suspect the fuel pump, which brings the fuel up. I did not suspect the filter, because then I would have had an issue on all the cylinders. If just focusing on cylinder 1 didn't help my problem, then maybe I'd go back. So what I started looking into was the fuel injectors. Now, I'm not suggesting that this is your problem. Your problem can be any of the things that we've talked about so far. This is just what I went through. So I took out cylinder 1's fuel injector, and I put in a fuel injector from a known good car. And this was cold. It had sat for a couple days at this point. So it was ice cold. I did this. I started it up, and it did not make a sound. It didn't rattle. It didn't do anything. It still didn't run right. I could feel that it didn't run right. But no, so it means I wasn't misfiring. So next, I took the original fuel injector that I took out, and the other 3, and I hooked them up. There's a great video on this. You could search for it. I hooked these up to a can of carburetor cleaner. I just used a piece of PVC air hose and a lot of electrical tape, and then the little straw that comes with the carburetor cleaner and fuel injector cleaner. Hooked it up to this, and very, very quickly tapped 12 volts into the solenoid here with that. And by the way, getting to the fuel injectors in this car is super easy. There's 1, 2 10mm bolts to get this air box off. After, of course, you get to the 10mm that's right there. Fingers covering it, now it's not. Covering it, now it's not. For the hose clamp that holds it onto the throttle body. Then, of course, this one. You're going to break this clip open and unplug your mass airflow sensor, and this just pops right off. Then there is 2 12mm bolts. You can kind of see one of them there that hold the fuel rail on. Hey, be careful with it, because there's a 10mm bolt that holds the line on, but you have to take off the windshield wiper assembly and all that to get to it. I've done this job a handful of times. without disconnecting any of that. Just be careful. And then you just lift the fuel rail up, and there is an O-ring on this side, and then a big O-ring down on the bottom that, you know, it's just pressure that keeps everything good. So they're easy to get out. So I took all 4 of the fuel injectors that were on the car, and I hooked each of them up to my tester/cleaner setup. I had full pressure on them, and when I tapped 12 volts to it, I got a very weak, forked stream. I took some rebuilt fuel injectors to compare, and I got like a very beautiful even spray out of them. So I'm thinking, okay, all 4 of these fuel injectors are pretty rough shape. The number 1 was the worst. I put in the 4 rebuilt ones, gave the car a night to sit, and it started like a brand new car. No feeling whatsoever. The engine would come on and off, literally like a Prius with 5,000 miles on it. It was perfect. So again, it's important to remember that, you know, everything that's special about a Prius is pretty much on the transmission side, not the engine side. You know, Priuses, yes, these are Atkinson cycle engines. It's the same engine that was in the Toyota Echo, Toyota Yaris, Scion XA, Scion XB, or the first generation of the XB. The only difference is it just has different valves and different timing and all that jazz to work better in a hybrid system. But this is just an engine. Now, the braking system, the cooling system, the transmission, everything else about the car is completely different than a regular car, but this is just an engine. So approaching it as just an engine to diagnose what's causing the misfire is going to help you understand why it's doing it. So again, just to recap, if you're really unlucky, it's a worn-out engine. Valves, piston rings, etc. If you're pretty unlucky, it's and by the way, I don't believe in luck. You know, Buddy Brown says, and I love the guy for saying it, hey, the harder I work, the luckier I get. You know, you work hard and get through this. But anyways, if you're, you know, pretty unlucky, it's the head gasket, which, hey, before I'd go through all that work, I'd get a good used motor and just pop it in. But if it's neither of those things, it has to be ignition or fuel or air, which, you know, you would have a code if it was like the mass airflow sensor, or if it was running lean because it wasn't getting enough gas, or rich because it was getting too much. But, you know, all those things aside, it's ignition, fuel, and air with compression that make this thing run. So figuring out which of those is causing the misfire is going to help you get through your problem. I'm not one to suggest just throwing parts at a car, but if diagnosis isn't your thing and you're committed to keeping your Prius, even if you have to put a new motor in it, you cannot lose by buying new spark plugs, NGK, new ignition coils, Denso, and 4 rebuilt fuel injectors, which, you know, eBay has them for like $60. Rock Auto, you'll probably be about 80 for rebuilt ones. And then if that doesn't solve your problem, you could move those parts over to a new motor if that ends up being your issue. Or maybe it's something totally unrelated, which is unlikely because it's either going to be, again, you know, the ignition, the fuel, or an internal engine issue. But, you know, once you have those parts, if you're committed to keeping your Prius, no matter what the problem is, those parts can be moved over even to a new motor when you put it in. So, again, this might not be your problem. It was definitely mine. Coil packs, fuel injectors. Stick with it. For me, it was a fuel injector. I replaced all 4. It's like a brand new car. For you, it might be something else. But hopefully this video is helpful. Hopefully it explains exactly what causes that sound, or what you're actually hearing. And if it is helpful, please give it a thumbs up. I want to hear what you guys are going through. I want to hear if this worked. I want to hear, you know, what it ended up being. So make sure, you know, be good and active in those comments. Again, if the video helped you at all, or if you found it entertaining, I really appreciate that thumbs up. And subscribing to the channel won't be a bad thing for you, I promise, because we always have great videos like these to help you guys through common problems. And our big thing is trying to make sure that you guys can get through jobs quicker and more efficiently than even the factory manual says. Quite a bit of jobs. We're about to post a video on 3rd generation Prius evaporator core replacement, and there was a whole bunch of things the factory manual says to do that we were able to get the job done effectively, safely, and professionally without having to do. So again, subscribe to this channel if you want good information and shortcuts to do jobs better and faster without sacrificing quality. So again, I'm Drew. I appreciate your time, and I really hope this helps, guys. Stick in there. If I could do it, you could do it.